There's firewood and food for 2 weeks. I'm going to the Maldives with my boyfriend, and I'm taking every dollar of your savings. My wife said that standing in the open door of a running Ford Explorer while snow collected in her hair. In the passenger seat, a man I'd spent 3 weeks quietly investigating wore sunglasses in the middle of a snowstorm, like he already had 1 foot on a runway. "Oh, and I changed the locks on your apartment," Meredith shouted over the wind, gravel spitting under the tires as she climbed in. "Don't bother trying to get back before we're gone." I stood on the porch of a cabin 200 miles from Dallas, 12 days out from having my appendix removed, a row of surgical staples still healing under my shirt, and I watched her taillights disappear into the tree line. And I smiled. Because Meredith had no idea what was waiting for her at Dallas, Fort Worth International Airport in 6 hours. My name is Alexander Whitfield. I'm 41, and until 4 months ago, I was Chief Operating Officer and an equity partner at Castellan Group, a commercial logistics and warehousing company off the Dallas North Tollway that I'd helped grow from 11 employees in a Farmers Branch strip mall into 400 people and a network of distribution centers from Fort Worth to San Antonio. I use the word was on purpose. By the time this is over, you'll understand exactly why that title belongs in the past tense and why I put it there myself. I drive a 5-year-old Tahoe. I still get my hair cut at the same shop on Lover's Lane I've gone to since business school. And for 11 years, I believed I'd built a life with the right person. I was wrong. But this isn't a story about a man who got destroyed and crawled off to lick his wounds. It's a story about what happens when you underestimate someone who's had weeks to prepare for the exact moment you think is your victory. Meredith and I met at a chamber mixer at the Adolphus Hotel 11 years ago. I was 33 years into Castellan, still cutting my teeth. She was 28, working commercial leasing in Uptown, sharp in a way that made a room rearrange itself around her. She laughed at something I said about spreadsheet software. An actual laugh, not the polite half-smile most people gave my jokes. I spent the rest of the night convinced I'd found someone who saw the world the way I did. We married 18 months later at the Dallas Arboretum. We bought a townhouse in the M Streets, then a place near Turtle Creek once Castellan's growth started showing up in my paycheck. Meredith stopped doing leasing work around year 6, decided she wanted to focus on what she called building our life. I never questioned it. I trusted her, and I was working 80-hour weeks trying to take Castellan from a regional player to something bigger. For years, our life had a rhythm I genuinely loved. Breakfast tacos on Sunday mornings. The Cowboys pregame low in the background while she did the crossword and I read operations reports. Every year, on the anniversary of the night we met, she'd leave a note on my desk that just said still worth it. Looking back, that phrase feels almost cruel in its irony. At the time, it was the kind of small, steady thing that made an 80-hour week survivable. Nobody asks what a marriage looked like when it was good. But ours was good for a long time, which is exactly what made the unraveling so hard to see coming. The first crack showed up on a Tuesday morning in September, the way these things always do, in a place so small, I almost missed it. Reviewing our joint statement over coffee, I found a recurring charge of $340 a month to something called Elevate Wealth Circle, dated back 4 months. "It's a coaching program," Meredith said that evening, barely looking up from her phone. "Personal development. You wouldn't be into it." I let it go. 11 years of marriage teaches you which hills are worth dying on. Then other things started. A new gym in Highland Park, 3 mornings a week, workouts that somehow ran 2 or 3 hours. Her phone, which used to sit face up on the counter, started disappearing into her purse the moment I walked in. And a name I'd never heard, Preston, dropped into conversation the way you mention someone you assume the other person already knows. "Preston says I have a real gift for this," she told me over dinner, apropos of nothing. When I asked who Preston was, she said, "My coach from Elevate. I told you about him," in a tone that made it clear I was the one who'd forgotten something. Here's what I did next, because I think it matters. I didn't confront her. I didn't go through her phone. Running operations for a company that moves freight across 9 states teaches you one thing above all else. The person who reacts first almost always loses. I called an old law school friend, Granta Lacroix, who ran a family law and asset protection practice on Ross Avenue. I asked him, hypothetically, what a man in my position might want to think about. He didn't sugarcoat it. Hypothetically, you get a forensic accountant before you get angry. Nadia Okafor, the forensic accountant Grant put me in touch with, took 11 days to hand me a report that changed everything I thought I understood about my marriage. Elevate Wealth Circle wasn't a coaching program. It was an unregistered investment fund promising 18 to 22% annual returns through what its marketing called diversified alternative assets, language that means nothing and hides everything. Over 11 months, Meredith had wired $61,000 out of an old brokerage account in her maiden name, money I hadn't even known she still controlled, directly into Elevate's operating account. And Preston wasn't named Preston at all. Nadia's report, cross-referenced through a contact of Grant's at the Texas State Securities Board, showed his legal name was Dale Kessler, a man with prior civil judgments in Arizona and Nevada for running unregistered securities offerings, and, as of 6 weeks earlier, an active FBI wire fraud investigation out of the Dallas field office spanning 4 states. Same playbook every time. Charm affluent, unhappy women in wealthy suburbs, position himself as a wellness and investment guru, move their money into accounts he controlled, vanish before the walls closed in. I sat with that report for a long time. Not angry yet. Just still. The way you get when a piece finally clicks into a puzzle you didn't know you'd been solving. My wife wasn't just having an affair. She was funding a fraud. And the withdrawal pattern from our joint account, starting 3 weeks earlier, told me she'd begun moving our shared money too. Not just her own. I met Nadia in person at a coffee shop on Henderson Avenue, far enough from either of our offices that nobody would recognize us. She laid 3 pages on the table between us. This isn't a coaching business, Alexander. There's no product, no service. Money comes in from maybe 40 or 50 accounts across 4 states, and it goes back out in patterns that only make sense if new deposits are paying off promises made to earlier investors. That's not a fund. That's a wheel. Eventually, it stops turning. Ask the question I'd been avoiding. Did Meredith know what she was really investing in, or was she just another victim? Nadia was quiet a moment. 2 of the wires out of your joint account went out the same week. She started using his first name at dinner. I think she knows exactly what she's doing. I just don't think she knows yet that you know. My father ran a freight brokerage out of Mesquite for 30 years. The one thing he told me more than once, legal pad and black coffee on the kitchen table, was that the man who wins a negotiation is the one already prepared for the outcome before the other side knows a negotiation is happening. So instead of a screaming match in our kitchen, I spent 6 weeks getting prepared. Grant and I drafted an irrevocable trust, and I moved roughly $2.4 million, my equity distributions from the last 4 years, into it, with Grant serving as trustee protector. Fully legal, fully documented, done weeks before anyone tried to touch it. I left a joint checking account with $38,000 in it untouched, and looking exactly as it always had, so Meredith would believe the money she thought she was stealing was the real thing. I told Walter Bishop, Castellan's chairman and the man who'd mentored me since I was 27, that I intended to resign and convert my equity into a structured buyout the following spring, not to run from the company, but to make sure that if my marriage became public wreckage, it wouldn't drag Castellan's stock structure down with it, and to make sure my ownership was liquid and out of reach of anyone looking for community property to divide. And Grant filed one more thing. A sworn petition in Dallas County Family Court for an emergency temporary restraining order against dissipation of marital assets, filed under seal, based on documented evidence that a spouse was actively funneling shared funds to a third party under federal investigation for fraud. Texas is a community property state. Judges have real discretion to award a disproportionate share of the estate when one spouse proves the other wasted or hid assets in bad faith. The judge signed it on a Thursday. It would freeze every joint account the instant it was served. We just needed the right moment to serve it. We didn't know yet that the moment would be an airport. I started having stomach pain on a Sunday night in late October, the kind that turns from an ache into something you can't stand up straight through. By 2 a.m., I was in the ER at Baylor University Medical Center. By 5, in surgery for a ruptured appendix. I woke up groggy and stapled with Meredith holding my hand, telling me how scared she'd been. For one dangerous hour, I let myself believe I'd read the whole situation wrong. 2 days later, still on pain medication, she suggested the cabin, the one her father had left us outside Winnsboro, in the piney woods east of Dallas. "You need quiet," she said. "No stress, no calls from the office. It'll be good for you." I agreed, partly because a recovering body doesn't argue well, partly because it fit my own plans better than she could have known. Grant and Nadia both knew exactly where I'd be, and exactly when the restraining order needed to be ready to serve. Being 200 miles from Dallas meant Meredith would believe she had a clear field to move on her own timeline, unaware that her timeline and mine were about to collide. What I hadn't planned for was the cruelty of what happened once we got there. A cold front rolled through that week, dumping snow across the property, the gravel road barely visible under the drifts. Meredith was almost tender that first night. Soup on the wood stove, an extra blanket while I dozed on the couch, and some small, foolish part of me let myself enjoy it, even knowing what I knew. Wednesday, she took a call outside for 40 minutes in the cold and came back flushed in a way the weather didn't explain. Thursday morning, she left for groceries and painkillers and was gone 5 hours for a 20-minute round trip. I didn't ask. I already knew the answers were coming to me another way. Grant had texted my satellite unit the night before. Card showed activity near Winnsboro this morning. Hold position. Thursday afternoon, an explorer I didn't recognize pulled up the drive. Dale Kessler stepped out wearing sunglasses in a snowstorm like he was posing for a brochure. Meredith walked out behind me with a duffel bag I'd never seen her pack and said the words that opened this story. She told me she'd already had the locks changed on the downtown apartment Castellan kept for me. She told me my phone, taken off the nightstand that morning under the pretense of checking something, was staying with her. "You won't need it where you're staying." Then she got in the passenger seat next to a wanted fraudster and drove into the snow, leaving a man 12 days removed from surgery alone in a cabin 200 miles from anyone who knew where he was. Except that wasn't quite true. 2 people knew exactly where I was. I stood on that porch and felt something I wasn't expecting. Calm. Not because I wasn't furious. But because everything happening in front of me was almost to the day what Grant, Nadia, and I had been planning for 6 weeks. I went back inside and pulled a small waterproof case from the bottom of my duffel bag, the one bag Meredith hadn't thought to search. Inside was a Garmin InReach satellite communicator, something I'd bought years earlier for deer season and never mentioned to anyone, because it had simply never come up. I sent 2 messages. To Grant, she's made her move. Cabin, no vehicle, no phone. Serve the order the second the cards get used. To Hank Dillon, a retired game warden who'd looked after the property for 20 years, and whom I'd quietly called 2 days before we ever left Dallas, a heads up we'd be out there. Hank showed up Friday morning with tire chains, took one look at my staple line, and drove me 40 minutes into town himself, asking only, "Your wife know you're leaving without her?" I spent the rest of the day at Grant's office on speakerphone with Nadia, watching 6 weeks of planning reach the moment it was built for. Meredith and Dale had booked a Qatar Airways flight out of DFW that evening, connecting through Doha to Malé. What Meredith didn't know was that the instant she or Dale swiped a card tied to our joint accounts, the restraining order Grant had been holding would freeze every account instantly, and that Nadia's forensic report, already shared with federal agents building their own case against Kessler, meant the FBI didn't need my tip to know who he was. They needed to know where he'd be. A little after 6 p.m., Meredith walked up to the Qatar counter in Terminal D, credit card in hand, and watched it decline. Then a second card. Then a third. While she stood there, increasingly panicked, 2 FBI agents approached the counter and asked Dale Kessler to step aside. He didn't run. There wasn't anywhere to run to, standing in an international terminal with a boarding pass in one hand and warrants from 3 states waiting for the other. A process server reached Meredith at the same counter, serving her with the divorce petition and the restraining order in front of a line of strangers, while she watched the man she'd left me for get led away in handcuffs. A plan she thought she'd executed flawlessly collapsed in under 4 minutes. She wasn't arrested that night. Prosecutors weren't pursuing charges against her directly, though her wire transfers to Elevate would become key evidence against Dale. But she never made it past the security checkpoint at Terminal D. She never made it to Doha. Nadia's report became central both to the federal case against Dale Kessler, currently awaiting trial, facing close to 15 years given the number of victims across 4 states, and to my divorce. Grant argued that Meredith's documented dissipation of marital assets into a fraud, combined with abandoning a spouse recovering from major surgery in a remote, snowbound property with no phone or transportation, constituted more than sufficient grounds for a disproportionate division of our estate under Texas law. The judge agreed. Meredith walked away with roughly 9% of what a straightforward split would have given her. No claim on the trust Grant had structured months before any of it became public, and a legal bill that reportedly took her most of a year to pay off. She sold her half of the Preston Hollow house, moved to a rental in Frisco, and last I heard was back doing commercial leasing, right where she started before deciding our marriage wasn't enough for her. Walter Bishop called the morning the story broke in the Dallas Business Journal, a short piece about a securities fraud arrest at DFW involving a self-styled investment coach, and asked if I was all right. When I told him I was, he laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from a man who's watched plenty of people crumble under far less. Your father would have handled it exactly the same way, he said. Quiet, then all at once. Coming from Walter, who'd known my dad since their companies traded referrals back in the 90s, that meant more than almost anything said to me that year. My resignation from Castellan closed out that spring, exactly as planned. My equity converted into a structured payout that, combined with the trust, gave me more financial independence at 41 than most people see in a lifetime. I didn't leave angry or defeated. I left because I'd already decided, long before Meredith made the decision for me in that driveway, that I wanted to build something with nobody else's name on the paperwork. 6 months later, I opened a small logistics consulting firm in the West Village, working with mid-size operators the way Castellan used to be before it got big. I still own the cabin in Winnsboro. Meredith's father left it to both of us, technically, but the settlement transferred her share to me outright. Part of what Grant called the cost of leaving a man to freeze. Hank checks on it every winter. Last December, I drove out there alone. No reason to be anywhere else, just to sit on that porch again, and remember what it felt like to watch taillights disappear into the snow and know, with absolute certainty, that I was going to be fine. My sister Claire, who flew in from Houston the week the FBI and the courts made everything public, told me something I think about often. She said the version of me she grew up with would have chased that car down the driveway screaming. Maybe an earlier version of me would have. But 11 years running freight across 9 states teaches you that the people who win aren't the ones who react loudest. They're the ones who are already 3 steps ahead before anyone else realizes there's a race happening. I don't spend much time wondering what Meredith thinks about, alone in that rental in Frisco, when she remembers standing in Terminal D watching Dale Kessler get walked away in handcuffs, while her cards declined, one after another. What I do know is that I spent 12 days recovering from surgery in a cabin in the snow, and I have never once regretted the calm I felt watching those taillights disappear, because I already knew exactly what was waiting for her at the end of that road.